Here's everything you need to know about the 12th house within your natal chart. And make sure that you stick around until the end of the video where I'll be sharing with you more resources that you can use to master the 12 houses within your natal chart. The 12th house in traditional astrology is known as the bad daimon, or the evil spirit. And this is because not only is the 12th house having no aspects relationship to the ascendant at all, but the 12th house is also a cadent house, as well as the final house within our natal charts. The 12th house has traditionally been considered the house of our self-undoing as well as our hidden enemies, and more often than not, when we read a natal chart and the 12th house is heavily emphasized, the 12th house has more to do with the self-undoing side of things than it has to do with our hidden enemies. I've often said that the 12th house is the house that we go to hide the corpses within our lives. And it's also the house that we go to where we shoot ourselves in our own foot, intentionally or unintentionally, but we find ourselves being attracted or even addicted to that particular type of behavior. I'm also very well known for saying that there are 4 toilet bowls within the cosmos. And the toilet bowls of the cosmos are the South Node, Neptune, the Southern Bending, which is the first square to the South Node in zodiacal order, as well as the 12th house. And that's because all of these astrological factors have the same influence of making us feel either weakened or debilitated, or as if we don't really have the strongest sense of presence within the world at large. The 12th house can be a house that makes people feel extraordinarily vulnerable, and it can even be described as feeling as if you are without skin within this lifetime, as if you've been incarnated into this lifetime, missing a fundamental layer of physical protection that other people around you seem to have. From a medical astrology perspective, the 12th house does rule the feet within the body, but it has also often been noted that the 12th house represents chronic illnesses or diseases that we find ourselves facing within a given lifetime. And when we find the ruler of the ascendant or the sun in the 12th house and heavily afflicted there, this can often be an indication of chronic ill health that a person is experiencing within this lifetime. Now, even though the 12th house does have to do with all of these things that we either do to ourselves or the conditions of our physical constitution specifically, the 12th house is also a very telling house, especially when we find other people represented by other houses within our natal charts present in our 12th house. If you find the rule of the 4th house in the 12th house, that can indicate a sense of distance between you and your father, that the father was not a major figure within your life, or that your father and your relationship to your family in general are topics that you don't enjoy talking about at all, because possibly both your father and family in general only represent a source of antagonism within your life. Often we've seen that women who have the ruler of their 5th house in their 12th house often have a very vulnerable or sensitive or even painful story within their lives as it relates to fertility, conception, pregnancy, and children in general. If we have the ruler of the 7th house in our 12th house, this is a very telling as well as a very peculiar set of circumstances, because the 12th house is the 6th house from the 7th house, which means that if we have our partner in our own 12th house, then that means our partner could be someone who's a very high-strung or very highly stressed out person in general, and it can also represent that our partner is someone who is physically ill, because if the 12th house is the 6th house of our partner, then that means that our partner is in their own 6th house. Now, this makes sense because if we have a partner struggling with their own health and wellness, and that's a major theme within our partner's life, then that can often seem like a very antagonistic or stressful theme within our own lives, which is why that person is showing up in our 12th house, because what is manifesting as stress for our partner is manifesting as self-undoing for us, because probably we feel as if that relationship is one that we just shouldn't be in because of the level of stress that it entails in order to maintain ourselves there. Conversely, when we find our partner in their own 12th house, which is our natal 6th house, then that can often represent that our partner is a major source of stress and anxiety within our own lives because our partner is actively engaging with their own 12th house things of self-undoing, which often manifests as our partners having addictive tendencies that they're navigating within their lives that causes us to be even more stressed out within our own lives in relationship to them. The 12th house can also be considered to be the house of working with people in at-risk communities, as well as a house that has to do with hospitals. So the most positive manifestation of the 12th house, if you have the ruler of the first house in the 12th house, or even the ruler of the 10th house in the 12th house, is that those are communities or people with whom you find yourself working, probably in the medical or the counseling professions. However, more often than not, the 12th house represents an area of pain and sensitivity within our lives that many people spend their entire lifetimes coming to terms with. The 12th house is the terrestrial house of joy of Saturn, and one of the things that the ancients associated this with is that Saturn is the author of mischief, as well as limitation, and all of the things that make us feel bound or inhibited within our lives. From a medical astrology perspective, Saturn is also a god of chronic illnesses, which is why, though Mars has his terrestrial joy in the 6th house of sickness, the 6th house can oftentimes represent diseases and illnesses of a more Martian nature that are acute and that possibly frequently come back within the life of a person, whereas diseases of a Saturnian or a 12th house nature tend to be chronic diseases that can possibly stay with the person their entire lives. However, it's very important to remember that when we're going to be talking about anything from a medical astrology perspective at all, there is no single chart factor that can give us a complete understanding of what's occurring within that person's life, and we have to interpret the chart in its entirety in order to see how these various things are manifesting for a person. And if you do not have the requisite skills in order to operate in that way from a medical astrology perspective, then it is a reckless thing to say anything to anybody about their charts that has to do with the constitution of their physical body or their well-being. Because of Saturn's association with the 12th house, the 12th house is also considered to be a house of animals larger than a goat. So when we consider beasts of burdens, whether they are elephants or horses or cows or bulls, we consider all of these animals to be 12th house animals. While I never usually have to speak to anybody about their 12th house as it relates to animals larger than a goat, I've once worked with a lady who does work with horses who had a very positively populated 12th house. In all things, the 12th house is a house of seclusion, and it is the sense deprivation tank of our natal charts. It represents solitude and aloneness, which some people can manifest by engaging in deeply spiritual practices that separate them from their larger community around them, while other people who do not have the resources to manifest their 12th house in that way can tend to lean towards things such as drugs as well as chronic substance abuse as a means of escaping life. If we apply our Chaldean order of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon to our 12 houses, we find ourselves returning to Venus in our 12th house, which is interesting since we initially saw Venus having an association with the 5th house of pleasure. And I think that this is important for us from an astrological perspective because it shows us that the very same things that can bring us a sense of pleasure within our lives are very often the things that lead to our self-destruction and our self-undoing in our 12th house. As far as hidden enemies are concerned, Guido Bonatti described the sort of friends that we find in the 12th house as being friends who smile to us at our face, but who are secretly stabbing us in our backs and slandering us when we're not around to hear them. Traditionally, the 12th house was also considered to be a house of witchcraft, but not witchcraft of the benevolent, earth-based spirituality type. The witchcraft and the hexing that we find in the 12th house specifically has to do with slandering people, as well as bearing ill will towards others without them knowing. Though the 12th house is a cadent house and technically should have 25% of power to give planets with which they can show their stuff and express themselves in the world at large, of the cadent houses, the 12th house most specifically corresponds with this aphorism that we find in Bethem Centiloquium, which tells us that a planet in a cadent house is like a man dead, having no motion, which means that as far as house placement is concerned, there is no other house within our natal charts that is so inhibitive or that can hinder the functions of a planet as much as the 12th house can. If you're enjoying this series on the houses and you would like to receive a free excerpt from my book, Mastering Traditional Astrology, set to publish in spring 2023, as well as never before released free video content from my masterclass series, then sign up for our newsletter down below. And if you're interested in medical astrology and want to find out more about houses within the horoscope that directly pertain to medical astrology, then check out this link to find out all you need to know about the 6th house within your natal chart.